There are some places where death arrives loudly, with sirens, chaos, and fear. And then there are places where death arrives quietly, so quietly that it blends into daily life. Kudathay was one of those places. A small village in Kerala, southern India, surrounded by green hills, narrow roads, and houses that stood close enough for neighbors to hear each other breathe. Life here moved slowly. Mornings began with prayer, afternoons with routine, and evenings with silence. People trusted each other. Families shared food, grief, and secrets, without ever calling them secrets. So when Anima Thomas died in 2002, no one questioned it. She had gone for her usual evening walk. She returned home tired, slightly dizzy. By night, she complained of nausea, vomiting, weakness. Before anyone could fully understand what was happening, she collapsed. Doctors said it was a heart attack. At her age, it made sense. The family mourned. The village moved on. Standing quietly among the mourners was her daughter-in-law, Jolly Joseph. Soft-spoken, calm, helpful, the kind of woman who made tea for everyone, even while grieving. The kind of woman no one ever suspected. 6 years passed. In 2008, Anima's husband, Tom Thomas, fell ill in almost the same way. Sudden discomfort, confusion, collapse. Deaths followed quickly. Once again, doctors cited natural causes. Age, health, fate. 2 deaths in one family felt tragic, but still believable. What no one realized was that something unnatural had already entered that house, and it wasn't planning to leave. By the time people noticed a pattern, it was already too late. In 2011, Jolly's husband, Roy Thomas, died. This time it felt different. Roy was younger, healthier. He had been dealing with financial stress, yes, but nothing that explained what happened next. After dinner one night, Roy went into the bathroom. Minutes passed, then longer. When the door was finally forced open, Roy was found unconscious. He was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't survive. This time an autopsy was done, and this time the truth surfaced. Cyanide, a lethal poison, fast-acting, silent, rarely used in domestic settings, almost impossible to mistake for anything else. But instead of triggering alarms, the discovery was buried under assumptions. Suicide, they said. Financial pressure, they said. The case was quietly closed, and Jolly Joseph continued living her life. She remained inside the same house, the same family, the same routine. She attended church. She spoke kindly. She smiled often. She even claimed she was a college professor, teaching at a prestigious institution. No one checked, because no one imagined they needed to. In 2014, another death followed. Matthew Mangiadel, Roy's maternal uncle, fell sick after consuming food inside the same household. The symptoms were familiar now: vomiting, dizziness, collapse. He died shortly after. Then in 2016, something happened that finally shook the family. A young woman named Silly, related through marriage, died suddenly. And days later, her 1-year-old daughter also died. 2 deaths, 1 household, 1 common presence. Jolly Joseph. 6 people were now dead. 6 deaths across 14 years, all connected by blood, marriage, or trust. Still, no one spoke out loud. Because how do you accuse a woman who cries with you? How do you doubt someone who sits beside you in church? How do you imagine that the person serving food might be serving death? The silence finally broke when Roy's brother, living far away, outside India, began asking questions. From a distance, patterns become clearer. He noticed how every death happened inside or around the same house. How symptoms repeated. How Jolly was always present. How property documents had changed hands. How stories didn't add up. In 2019, he demanded answers. Bodies were exhumed. Years after burial, forensic teams examined remains, searching for what time had tried to erase. And once again, cyanide appeared. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. The truth could no longer stay buried. On October 5, 2019, Jolly Joseph was arrested. The woman everyone trusted. The woman who had lived among the dead, quietly adding to their number. During interrogation, investigators uncovered something even more disturbing. Jolly had carefully constructed a false identity. She was never a professor. She had forged documents, lied consistently, manipulated relationships. She had obtained cyanide by convincing others it was needed for pest control. She administered it slowly, carefully, sometimes mixed into food, sometimes dissolved and served casually, always with patience, always without panic. This wasn't rage. This wasn't impulse. This was calculation. According to investigators, her motive was control over property, over inheritance, over her own carefully constructed reality. One death made the next easier. One lie made the next believable. For 14 years, she walked free, because no one expects evil to look ordinary. The trial is still ongoing. Justice moves slowly, especially when crimes hide behind family walls. But one thing is certain. The Koudathei cyanide murders changed how an entire country looks at trust, at domestic spaces, at silence. Because sometimes the most dangerous place isn't a dark alley, it's a dining table. And sometimes the most terrifying criminals don't run, they stay. They smile, and they wait. If you're still here, listening quietly in the dark, thank you for staying with this story. If you want more real crime stories told slowly, honestly, and without noise, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and explore the other stories on this channel, because there are many more truths that sound unbelievable until you hear them. She didn't run after the arrest. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. Jolly Joseph walked with the police calmly, as if this was just another routine she had prepared for. That calmness disturbed people more than the murders themselves, because when someone is innocent, fear shows. When someone is shocked, denial shows. But Jolly showed neither. As news spread across Kerala, and then beyond India, people began asking the same question over and over again. How did no one notice? To understand that, you have to go back again, not to the deaths, but to the woman herself. Jolly Joseph was not loud. She was not dramatic. She was not the kind of person who demanded attention. She understood something very important about human behavior. People trust those who don't try too hard. She spoke softly. She listened more than she talked. And most importantly, she positioned herself as someone slightly above suspicion, but never above empathy. She told people she was educated, a lecturer, someone with stability, someone respectable. In a community where education is admired deeply, that alone gave her credibility. No one asked for proof, because why would they? Inside the Thomas household, Jolly slowly became central to everything. After Anima's death, she took more responsibility. After Tom's death, even more. Each loss tightened her grip, not through force, but through presence. She was always there, always helping, always managing. And with every death, something else happened quietly. Property shifted, authority shifted, control shifted. Investigators later found that documents had been altered. Ownership papers changed hands. Decisions were made when people were emotionally weakest. And Jolly was always the one offering solutions. When Roy died in 2011, the family was already emotionally exhausted. 2 deaths before him had numbed them. So when cyanide was found, the explanation of suicide felt easier than the truth. Accepting murder would have meant accepting betrayal, and that's harder than grief. That decision changed everything. Because once the system accepted suicide, Jolly learned something powerful. She learned that the truth could be redirected. From that point on, her actions became more confident, more precise, more dangerous. By the time Matthew Mangiadel died in 2014, Jolly had perfected her method. She understood dosage, timing, symptoms. She understood how long it took before help became useless. Cyanide acts fast, but not always instantly. It creates confusion, both in the body and in the room. Vomiting, breathlessness, panic, enough chaos to distract, enough time to step back and appear concerned. No alarms were raised. Then came 2016. Silly was young, healthy, newly married. Her death shocked people more than the others. But again, the explanation came quickly. Illness, sudden complications, tragedy, and then her infant daughter died. That death should have stopped everything. A child dying without warning is never normal. Even in a place where people accept fate easily, this felt wrong. Whispers began. Quiet ones, careful ones. No one wanted to accuse openly, but fear entered the conversations. Still, nothing moved. Because suspicion without courage does nothing. What finally broke the silence was distance. Roy's brother, living far away, had emotional distance, and that gave him clarity. He wasn't inside the daily routines. He wasn't dependent on family harmony. He looked at dates, reports, and stories side by side and saw repetition. The same symptoms, the same house, the same woman. When he demanded reinvestigation, resistance followed. Exhumation was considered disrespectful, painful, unnecessary, but persistence won. When the bodies were examined, Cyanide confirmed what intuition had been screaming for years. At that moment, the story stopped being about coincidence. It became about intention. Police reconstruction revealed chilling details. Jolly had sourced cyanide through acquaintances, claiming it was needed for pest control. She stored it safely, measured it carefully. Cyanide doesn't forgive mistakes too much, and death is immediate and suspicious. Too little and survival raises questions. She never made those mistakes. That level of precision doesn't come from impulse. It comes from planning. During questioning, Jolly's stories shifted. Dates changed. Details blurred. Her calm finally cracked, but only slightly. Investigators described her as emotionally detached, focused more on logistics than remorse. What haunted officers most was not what she did, but how long she did it. 14 years. 14 years of meals served, conversations held, prayers offered, and deaths delivered quietly. The trial continues, but public judgment came fast. Not because people wanted revenge, but because they wanted answers. They wanted to know how safety had failed so completely. The coup d'etat case changed how Indian law enforcement views domestic deaths. Patterns that once felt harmless are now examined closely. It changed how families document illness, how doctors question causes, how police connect timelines. But for the listeners sitting quietly right now, there's a deeper truth here. Evil doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives early, makes breakfast, and asks how your day was. And if this story kept you listening, if you stayed till now, half awake, half aware, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. More real crime stories are waiting here. Slow, honest, and unsettling in the quietest way. Because the scariest stories are the ones that don't need to shout. After the arrests, people expected closure. But closure doesn't come easily when the crime lived inside a family for years. The Thomas house in coup d'etat went silent. Doors stayed shut. Curtains stayed drawn. The same rooms where laughter once echoed now carried a heaviness that never fully lifted. Neighbors walked past slowly, lowering their voices without realizing it. Some avoided the house completely. Others couldn't stop looking at it. Because that house had watched everything. Inside police files, the story grew darker. Investigators began mapping Jolly Joseph's life year by year, death by death. And when they did, something unsettling appeared. Each murder wasn't just an act of violence, it was a step forward in her personal agenda. Every death removed an obstacle. Every funeral created space. After Anima's death, Jolly gained sympathy. After Tom's death, she gained influence. After Roy's death, she gained control. Grief became currency. She used it well. Witnesses later recalled how Jolly always positioned herself as the most affected person in the room. She cried, but not uncontrollably. She spoke, but not too much. She knew exactly how grief was supposed to look. Enough to be believable. Never enough to raise concern. Police psychologists later explained this behavior in simple terms. This wasn't emotional outburst killing. This was emotional management. Jolly didn't lose control, she maintained it. During interrogation, officers noticed how she spoke about the victims. Not with hatred, not with anger, but with distance. As if she were describing events she had read about, not lives she had ended. That emotional gap terrified them. Because remorse didn't appear. The investigation also uncovered how she manipulated people around her, not through threats, but through trust. She convinced others to help her unknowingly. She borrowed. She asked favors. She told partial truths that sounded complete. No one believed they were helping a murderer. That's how quietly this case operated. The trial brought moments that shocked even seasoned observers. Prosecutors laid out timelines where funerals overlapped with document changes. Cyanide purchases aligned with illnesses. Phone records showed who was present and who wasn't. Every detail tightened the noose. Still, Jolly maintained innocence in court. She listened. She took notes. She whispered to her lawyers. Her face rarely changed. Cameras captured her eyes often, not because they showed guilt, but because they showed nothing at all. Outside the courtroom, families of the victims struggled with a different pain. Not just loss, but betrayal. They replayed memories endlessly. Meals shared. Conversations had. Moments where warning signs now seemed obvious, but weren't at the time. That kind of guilt stays forever. In coup d'essai, people began questioning their own instincts. How many times had they ignored discomfort out of politeness? How often had they stayed silent to avoid conflict? The case forced an entire community to confront an uncomfortable truth. Kindness without boundaries can be dangerous. Experts across the world took notice. Because this wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a crime of patience. And patience is what makes it so unsettling. Jolly Joseph didn't kill in the heat of the moment. She killed between prayers, between routines, between normal days. She waited months, years. She let time erase suspicion before acting again. That's what made her invisible. As the legal process continues, the house remains. The village remains. Life continues, but differently. Doors lock sooner now. Questions are asked more directly. Trust is no longer automatic. And somewhere in prison walls, a woman sits who once lived at the center of a family and quietly erased it. This case doesn't end with a verdict. It ends with awareness. Because if you take anything away from this story, let it be this: danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it blends in. Sometimes it earns your trust first. And sometimes it waits. If you're listening to this late at night, eyes heavy, thoughts drifting, remember that silence can hide stories deeper than noise ever could. Stay curious, stay aware, and stay with this channel for more real stories that unfold slowly, honestly, and without distraction. Because some truths don't wake you up. They follow you into sleep. Time passed, but the questions didn't. People often think that once a killer is arrested, the story ends. That justice brings relief. But in cases like this, arrest is only the beginning of a different kind of suffering, the kind that lives inside the minds of those left behind. For the families connected to the Thomas household, memory itself became a burden. Every shared meal was replayed. Every smile was re-examined. Every moment of kindness was questioned. They began to ask themselves things no one should have to ask. Was that day normal, or was it planned? Was that concern genuine, or an act? Was that silence respect or calculation? Investigators revisited scenes that had once seemed ordinary. The kitchen, the dining table, the cupboards where food was stored. Nothing about those spaces looked dangerous. And that was the most disturbing part. Cyanide doesn't leave visible scars right away. It works internally, quietly. It creates chaos inside the body while leaving the outside almost untouched. Doctors explained how symptoms could easily mimic heart failure or sudden illness, especially when no one is expecting poison. And Jolly knew that. She chose cyanide not just because it was lethal, but because it was misleading. During reconstruction, police learned how she timed her actions carefully, often choosing moments when victims were already tired, already unwell, already vulnerable. A small push when the body was least able to fight back. It wasn't force. It was advantage. As details emerged, another chilling truth came out. Jolly never killed out of fear of being exposed. She killed to maintain the story she had created. Every death supported the lie that she was a victim of bad luck, a woman cursed by fate. And society believed that narrative easily, because people are more comfortable with tragedy than with malice. Psychologists following the case explained that Jolly showed traits of extreme emotional detachment. Not madness, not loss of control, but a complete separation between action and emotion. To her, death wasn't personal. It was functional. That realization shook people deeply, because it meant she could sit with family members, listen to their grief, and feel nothing while planning the next step. The community began holding meetings. Churches discussed safety. Local leaders urged people to report unusual patterns, even if it felt uncomfortable. The word pattern became powerful, something once ignored, now taken seriously. Media attention grew worldwide. Audiences outside India were stunned, not because serial killers were unheard of, but because this one hid in plain sight for over a decade. No disguises, no escape attempts, no dramatic breakdowns, just routine. And routine, it turns out, can be deadly. In prison, Jolly Joseph remained largely silent. No public breakdown, no dramatic confession, just paperwork, legal arguments, dates, numbers. Her world reduced to files and hearings, the same kind of structure she once controlled so well. But outside, the impact kept spreading. The coup d'etat case is now studied in criminology discussions as an example of long-term domestic serial poisoning. It changed how unexplained deaths are evaluated, how family testimony is weighed, how silence is interpreted. It also changed how people listen to their instincts, because sometimes discomfort is the only warning you get. If you're still listening now, you might notice how quiet this story feels. No chase scenes, no sudden explosions, just time and trust slowly being misused. And that's what makes it linger. Because long after the audio ends, long after the lights are off, the thought remains: how many stories are unfolding quietly, right now, without anyone noticing? The answer to that question is why stories like this are told. Slowly, carefully, so they are never forgotten. Even now, years later, people struggle with one uncomfortable truth. This wasn't a mystery that lacked clues. The clues were always there. They were just too quiet to demand attention. One death can be fate. Two can be coincidence. But six is a story trying to be heard. Yet inside families, patterns are the hardest to see. Familiarity softens suspicion. Love dulls logic. And Jolly Joseph relied on that more than any poison. She understood that the closer you are to someone, the less likely they are to question you. Investigators later said that if even one person had spoken earlier, one doctor, one relative, one neighbor, the chain could have ended sooner. But everyone waited for certainty. And certainty never comes when danger looks ordinary. This is where the case becomes more than a crime story. It becomes a warning. Because the most dangerous environments are not unfamiliar ones. They are the spaces we assume are safe. Homes, families, kitchens, places where we lower our guard completely. Jolly didn't break into lives. She was invited into them. She didn't threaten. She comforted. She didn't rush. She waited. And waiting is what made her invisible. The legal process will continue to move forward. Appeals, hearings, arguments, but no verdict can return what was taken. No sentence can undo 14 years of silent manipulation. Justice may punish the crime, but it cannot repair trust once it's broken at this level. For the families, healing doesn't come from answers anymore. It comes from acceptance, accepting that they were deceived, not foolish. That love was used against them. That kindness was not a mistake, even if it was exploited. And that distinction matters. Because if kindness becomes something we regret, then the damage spreads further than any crime ever could. This story stays with people not because of how violent it was, but because of how calm it was. How patient, how deliberate. There were no warning screams, no desperate final moments witnessed by crowds, just quiet endings inside familiar walls. And that's why, when you listen to this story late at night, it feels heavier than others. Because it doesn't rely on shock. It relies on recognition. Recognition that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like someone you've already trusted. If you're still here, still listening, still awake enough to follow every word, then you understand why these stories matter. Not for fear, not for entertainment, but for awareness. Because awareness is the only thing that breaks silence. And silence is where stories like this begin. Silence has a way of convincing us that everything is fine. That if nothing loud is happening, nothing wrong is happening. The coup d'etat case exists because of that belief. When investigators finally stepped back and looked at the full timeline, they noticed something that felt almost unbearable. There were long stretches of normal life between the deaths. Festivals were celebrated. Birthdays were observed. Weddings were attended. Life didn't stop after each funeral. It simply adjusted. And Jolly adjusted best of all. She adapted to each loss like someone learning a routine. She learned how long grief lasted. She learned when questions faded. She learned how sympathy worked in cycles. She learned when people stopped checking. Time became her shield. That's what makes long-term crimes so difficult to detect. People expect danger to escalate quickly. They expect patterns to feel obvious. But when harm is spread out over years, it hides behind everyday life. It dissolves into memory. Police later described this case as one of emotional camouflage. Jolly blended into grief so completely that she became invisible inside it. She was never the loudest mourner, never the quietest, always somewhere in the middle, exactly where suspicion doesn't land. Even after her arrest, some people struggled to accept the truth, not because the evidence was weak, but because the idea was too heavy. Accepting it meant accepting that the mind can separate action from feeling entirely, that someone can destroy without hatred, without anger, just intent. This case forces us to ask a difficult question: how much do we really know the people closest to us? And the honest answer is uncomfortable. We know their habits, their routines, their public faces, but inner worlds are private places, and some people guard them very well. The Thomas family didn't fail. The system didn't completely fail either. What failed was the assumption that danger always looks dangerous. That assumption cost 6 lives. Around the world, listeners hear this story and instinctively distance themselves from it. Different country, different culture, different context, but the method doesn't belong to one place. Trust, routine, and silence exist everywhere. That's why this story travels. Because the lesson isn't regional. It's human. If there's one thing this case teaches, it's that questions are not accusations. Paying attention is not betrayal. And discomfort is not disrespect. Sometimes it's protection. As this story draws closer to its end, there's no dramatic resolution waiting. No sudden twist. Just the weight of knowing that truth arrived late, but it did arrive. And that matters, because telling these stories keeps patterns visible. It keeps silence from settling too comfortably. It reminds us that listening closely, to people, to instincts, to repetition, is never wasted. If you've stayed with this story from the beginning, thank you for giving it your time. If this channel helps you think, reflect, or simply listen a little more carefully, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and explore the other stories waiting here. New stories, quietly told, slowly uncovered. Because sometimes the most important truths are the ones we almost miss.